Hello, this is Nevada, Civil Rights and Ethno-Cultural Politics. What about some of the basics of the past? For many years, Nevada, and by the way, Las Vegas as well, have been called the Mississippi of the West, referring to racial and ethnic discrimination. The Declaration of Rights for Nevada states the following: all men are by nature free and equal, and have certain inalienable rights. By the way, the Declaration of Rights is part of Nevada's Constitution. The men who wrote these words did not believe that these words applied to all men or women. How do we know? Because as one of its first acts in 1861, even before gaining statehood, the Nevada Territorial Legislature passed a law that said no black person or mulatto or Indian or Chinese would be allowed to give evidence in court either in favor or against any white person. The legislature also prohibited cohabitation of white persons with Indians, Chinese, or blacks. The breach of this law was punishable by fine or jail time. So certainly there's no hint here of any intended equality, legal equality. Let me now turn to some specific groups in Nevada's early history, and then after we cover specific groups, I will go to the conclusion. So Chinese Americans in Nevada. Chinese immigrants began arriving in Nevada in 1849 for the same reason that everybody else. That is to find wealth in the area's mines. But discrimination and violence against the Chinese began immediately. A state law was passed that prohibited Chinese from owning land. Chinese miners were targeted for violence very frequently and eventually driven from mining. Great increase in Chinese population occurred from 1867 to 1869 during the construction of the Central Pacific Railroad across the state. They were willing to work hard for low wages, and despite this, or maybe because of this, they were viewed with hostility by local inhabitants who saw them as a threat to their own livelihoods. Mining unions acted to exclude Chinese from the unions, thereby preventing them from working in the mining industry, as mines were a closed union industry at the time. Chinese Americans in Nevada continues. Federal laws were passed in 1882, 1907, 1921, and 1924 that established immigration quotas, and they were very restrictive, virtually eliminating the legal opportunity for immigration from China. The most draconian law was the 1924 National Origins Act, which set strict immigration quotas based on census results of the 1890. After 1881, Chinese in Nevada were allowed to give testimony in court against white people, but this testimony was sometimes disregarded. For example, when two elderly Chinese laundrymen were beaten to death in Tonopah's Chinatown, more than 20 Chinese witnesses testified that 5 white men who were on trial for the crime actually committed the crime, but all 5 were nevertheless acquitted. Many anti-Chinese organizations were created in the state. Virginia City, Nevada passed a resolution that stated that the presence of the Chinese in Nevada was injurious to the welfare of the state and the danger to the Republic, meaning the United States. Most of Reno's Chinatown, including private homes, was burned to the ground in 1908 by a mob acting on instructions of local officials. Employment prohibitions against the Chinese were repealed by the state in 1959, and in addition, various laws enacted by the federal government in the 1960s and 1970s acted to free the Chinese and other minorities from discrimination. There have been many other Asian groups in Nevada, So we have Filipinos, Pakistanis, Japanese, Koreans. The single largest group of Asians in Nevada is, and for a long time has been, the Filipinos. So if you look at the overall number of Asians in Nevada, in 1990, they constituted only 2.9% of the population. But since then, growth has been dramatic. In the year 2000, the census showed that the Asian Americans were about 4.5% of the Nevada's population. By 2004, this number grew to 5.7%. By 2021 to 8.3%, and 2022, 9.1%. So we see effectively that between 1990 and 2022, Asian population in Nevada as a percentage of population more than tripled. So, like I said, the Filipinos are the single largest group, and the U.S. Census estimated that in 2022, Filipinos were 152,233 people in Nevada. They are followed in number by the Chinese with 70,458 people. And the census estimates that in July of 2022, there were more than 290,000 Asian Americans in the state of Nevada. What about African Americans in Nevada? We know that fewer than 40 African Americans lived in Las Vegas at the time of the 1910 census, and only 134 lived in the entire state. However, by mid-2022, the percentage of African Americans in Nevada's population has risen to 9.4%. So African American population began to rise significantly in the state during the 1930s and 1940s, first because of the construction of the Hoover Dam, and then the creation of World War II related industries and military bases. Companies constructing Hoover Dam generally refused to hire African Americans. In Nevada, segregation was done not by state law, but by private businesses. So private employers were left free to discriminate, and many of them did. Open discrimination existed elsewhere in housing, employment, and entertainment. So African Americans were relegated to menial jobs. They were also not allowed to eat, drink, gamble, or attend shows in casinos and restaurants. Business owners did not want to offend the white clientele from California, many of whom were Southerners who had migrated west. African American entertainers like Sammy Davis Jr. and Lena Horne were not allowed to stay in the hotels in which they played, despite being nationally known performers. When the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People threatened massive demonstrations and sit-ins, Las Vegas Mayor Orrin Gregson announced in 1960 the end to segregation in public accommodations located within city limits. An interesting fact is that the Las Vegas Strip is not located in the city limits of Las Vegas, but rather in the unincorporated areas of Winchester and Paradise. So the Las Vegas Strip would remain segregated until after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In Reno and Carson City, there were sit-ins, protests, demonstrations, and in 1969 and 1970, race riots have occurred at Las Vegas schools. Now, the next topic is Latinos in Nevada. The Spanish and later Mexicans were the first non-native explorers of the area, which is now known as Nevada, although they did not settle in Nevada in large numbers. Latinos began migrating to the state in large numbers in the 1860s. They worked in the mines, in service jobs, and as sheep and cattle ranchers. In this early period, most of the southern Nevada's Latino population resided in the northern part of the state. Latino migration into southern Nevada began in the early 20th century with the construction of railroad line between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City that passed through, of course, the Las Vegas Valley. Along with the Chinese, Mexican laborers performed much of the work on this and other railroads in the state. In the American Southwest as a whole, Mexicans made up 70% of the section crews and 90% of the extra gangs on principal railroad lines. The most significant migration of Latinos to the state began after World War II. Federal investment in the state, in the form of capital and military expenditures, brought Latinos to Nevada in large numbers as construction workers, as soldiers, and also to fill other occupations. White homeowners in the Las Vegas area had restrictive covenants prohibiting the sale of property in most parts of Las Vegas to anyone other than whites. So Hispanics, blacks became concentrated in the western part of and in the northern part of the greater Las Vegas area. Cuban Americans in Nevada. So virtually all Latinos residing in Nevada prior to the 1960s were of Mexican descent. The pattern changed somewhat with communist revolution of Fidel Castro in Cuba. A number of exiles with experience in the gambling industry which they received in Havana, settled in Nevada to continue the occupations that they had known in their homeland. So Havana used to be really the hub for gambling in the Western Hemisphere and had some of the most luxurious casinos prior to Castro's revolution. But afterwards, as I said, things have changed. And many Cubans fled for the United States, and some reached Nevada. Latinos from the East Coast, primarily Puerto Ricans, also began to migrate to the state during this period. Latino population growth in Nevada has been very rapid. In 1980, the Latino population was less than 7% of the state. In 1990, more than 10%. By the year 2000, 20%. By 2009, 26.5%. And by 2022, more than 30%. So the growth of the Latino population is one of the most remarkable demographic facts about modern Nevada. Politics and women in Nevada. Women in Nevada could vote since 1914. This is a pattern in Western states and territories granting women suffrage prior to the passage of a constitutional amendment which guaranteed it at the national level in 1920. So casinos and bars in Nevada fiercely resisted hiring women as dealers and bartenders out of fear that hiring them would lead to overall lower salaries, thus undercutting the men. The men were considered to be the breadwinners. And so casinos, bars, unions did not want women to compete for these relatively high-paying jobs. In 1958, the Las Vegas City Commission prohibited women from being hired as bartenders. Instead, women were more often to be found in the lower-paying jobs of waitresses, cashiers, and keno runners. It was not until 1981 that Las Vegas casinos and unions signed an agreement to end discrimination against women in employment-related matters. Please note that this is 17 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so what we see here most likely is the inability of the enforcement arm of the federal government to consistently reach this island in the desert, Las Vegas, where the mob and the casinos ran their own show, and were not subject to consistent enforcement, which would prevent them from discriminating against women. So it took a local agreement of 1981 to finally end it. Nevada is the fourth in the country for the percentage of women who experience domestic violence in their lifetime, with almost 44% as of data for 2023. Nevada is one of only 15 states that failed to ratify the proposed Equal Rights Amendment to the federal Constitution. Proposals to ratify were defeated in the state Senate in 1973 and again in 1975, and in the state assembly in 1977. Wishing to avoid the controversy created by the Equal Rights Amendment issue, the legislature submitted the ratification issue to the voters. After heavy lobbying against the proposal by conservative women and business interests and the Church of Latter-day Saints, ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment failed in 1978 by 2-1. Sexual harassment has also been an issue, a persistent issue, even in the 21st century. Some Nevada employers, for example, the Department of Public Safety, have been plagued by allegations of sexual harassment. Jacqueline Sandage, a captain assigned to the Nevada Highway Patrol Training Division, since then, of course, Highway Patrol has been renamed into Nevada State Police, but at the time, Highway Patrol, she made allegations that her supervisor, the head of the NHP, sexually harassed her. As a result of the investigations, the head of the NHP resigned. Sandage was the first woman to achieve the rank of lieutenant and then captain with the Nevada Highway Patrol. A federal harassment lawsuit filed in the federal court in December of 2006 asked for $500,000 in damages. The lawsuit charged that her supervisor and other command officers contributed to and permitted a sexually hostile work environment, which included calling her names ranging from the princess to unprintable insults. She claimed in the suit that her supervisor and others made numerous sexual and obscene comments in the presence of other Highway Patrol employees, including telling her at one point, "I know why I don't like that new jacket. I can't see your ass." Sandage alleged that another Nevada Highway Patrol command officer leered at her and commented that she looked good in uniform. Also, she alleged someone put a McDonald's restaurant application in her inbox one day. Furthermore, she alleged that when she complained about those incidents and crude remarks by troopers about her, Public Safety Director George Togliatti told her she should just suck it up a little, and said some of her complaints were blown out of proportion. Incidentally, Togliatti resigned in 2006, though apparently not directly as a result of Sandage's complaints. $480,000 settlement was eventually paid in May of 2008 to Jacqueline Sandage. A series of other complaints were immediately filed. For example, in September of 2008, Department of Public Safety Sergeant Bonnie Kendall filed a lawsuit claiming her co-workers repeatedly sexually harassed her. A Reno secretary for the Nevada Highway Patrol has filed a lawsuit in October of 2008 claiming her male co-workers created a hostile work environment and repeatedly sexually harassed her. So what we see here is these sexual harassment lawsuits, although perhaps sometimes they are necessary, should probably be the last resort, and prevention is probably better for all concerned. Not only does prevention stop the actual abuse from taking place, but also it saves taxpayers a lot of money, because once you add these large punitive settlements on top of police officers' annual salaries, which in Nevada can be very considerable, we see that the taxpayers in Nevada have to pay this. And we see that a number of other sexual harassment lawsuits, Mark Mossert, attorney based in Reno, represented a lot of those. So again, lawsuits may be the last resort, and prevention should probably be the emphasis, the first resort. Protection based on sexual orientation in Nevada. So in 1993, the legislature repealed the anti-sodomy law. In 1995, the legislature added sexual orientation to the state's hate crime laws that increase penalties for crimes committed against an individual due to the person's race, religion, color, nationality, or disability. In 1999, the legislature passed a law that outlawed employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. In 2003, the legislature unanimously passed a law that allowed hospital patients to designate who their visitors should be. In 2005, the legislature passed a law declaring that it's a state policy that services provided by private establishments like casinos, restaurants, movie theaters, hotels, and other public accommodations should not be denied to anyone on the basis of sexual orientation. So we see that Nevada has been progressive in this regard as well. There are many sources on civil rights and ethno-cultural politics in Nevada, and I encourage you to consult them and to do, as always, your own research, as information is varied and interesting. Thank you so much for your attention.